Our animation is finished, and we've got our lighting done, and we're ready to do a batch rendering. We're going to export this out to a series of numbered still frames. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We don't want to export directly to a movie file, because for one thing, the movie can be very, very large. If you have a high resolution shot, or if it's a very long shot, then a movie file can be very, very large on disk and become unmanageable. Additionally, there's a risk that if you render out directly to a movie, that if the rendering has to be interrupted, let's say there's a power failure or you have to restart the computer or something, then you will lose all your work. So when you render to a movie, it's constantly appending onto the end of that movie as each new frame is drawn. And that's a real problematic situation. You don't want to have to start over from frame 1 on a 600 frame shot when each frame is taking an hour to render. So you want to render to individually numbered still frames, so if you have to interrupt the rendering, you can just pick up on the next frame. Additionally, when you render out, you want to make sure you're rendering to a completely uncompressed or losslessly compressed format. And a lot of movie formats have compression built into them. So for example, if you save directly out to an MP4 file, you're going to have image data lost in that process, and you'll never be able to get that back. The best process for animation is to render out to losslessly compressed individual still frames that are pristine and perfect, and then render that out to a movie file, which can optionally then be compressed at that stage. Let's go into the render settings and set up all the options for a batch render. Render settings. And in the Common tab, we need to do a lot of stuff here. We need to set a file name. I would recommend giving it the same name as your currently open scene file. And mine currently is ball11. I will call my file name ball11. BALL _0011. If I tap the space bar now, that'll be entered in here, and you will see up here it says file name ball11.iff. IFF is the image file format that was designed specifically for Maya. I would recommend that you actually create a folder for each image sequence, because on a project you may have to render a shot more than once, or you may have lots of shots, or both. Therefore, each image sequence should be kept separate from every other image sequence. And the way to do that here is to simply create a folder in this file name prefix. Just simply add a slash and then put in the file name. So everything before the slash will be interpreted as a folder, and everything after the slash will be interpreted as a file name. So I can call this file name bounce _0011, just to make sure I'm clear on what I'm doing here. Hit the tab key and that'll be entered, and now you'll see file name is ball0011/bounce 0011.iff. That's going to be a new folder, and this will be the file name. Now we come to the image format. We don't want to use the Maya IFF. A lot of Adobe programs will be able to read the Maya IFF, but Apple programs will not. I don't recommend using IFF also because you can't see thumbnails in your Windows Explorer or your Mac OS X Finder windows. And being able to see thumbnails is really helpful. For example, you can identify if you have a corrupt file. I would always choose the image format of PNG for a simple rendering like this. Portable network graphics is a losslessly compressed format, so it's just going to zip the data and crunch it down a little bit using LZW compression, and it's not actually going to throw away any image data. So PNG is our file format. Then we come to the naming convention, and currently it's set to single frame. The one we want to choose is name.number.extension. It's important that the extension go at the end. So when I choose that, we will see now it says bounce 11.0001.png to bounce 11.0010.png. So I've got 10 frames to render out by default. It's important that the PNG go at the end. And it goes without saying that on your system, you need to make sure that you can actually see extensions. On Windows, the extensions are hidden by default, and you'll need to go into an Explorer window and go into the Tools settings and turn off the option to hide extensions. We need to see those. Okay, so PNG is the file type. And then down here we got the frame range. Scroll down. We're going to render up to frame 30. Then the renderable camera. This is super important. We don't want to render the perspective view. Click on that. We want to choose camera 1. We're going to render camera 1. We've already got our image size done. And we've already, in my software tab, set the quality to be production quality. And we're good now. I'll close the render settings and save the file. I don't need to increment it this time because the only thing I've changed is the render settings. File save scene. Now we're ready to go ahead and render. And to do that, we will want to go into the rendering menu set. Rendering. And the render menu. And go into batch render options. There's an important switch here that says use all available processors. Almost all computers nowadays have more than one core. And Maya treats cores as processors. Maya doesn't know the difference between a hard processor and a core, which is sort of like a processor inside a chip. So you need to know how many cores you have on your computer. And that way you can control how much power Maya is going to use. Because if you have use all available processors turned on and you have insufficient cooling on your computer, you can actually burn your computer up by rendering. And this is not a laughing matter. You can actually burn your computer and destroy it by just rendering in Maya. Because Maya will use 100% of the available power of your computer. So it goes without saying you need to have adequate cooling. And then additionally, just as an insurance policy, you want to make sure that you don't render on all processors. Find out how many cores you have. And then only use some of them to render. So you leave a little bit of headroom. And that way, actually, you'll be able to use your computer for other things while Maya is rendering. That's very important. You don't want to have Maya take up the entire computer so that you can't even, for example, check your email or anything for hours or days or weeks at a time. So you need to know how many cores you have. How do you do that? Well, on Windows, what you do is you go into the Task Manager, Control-Shift-Escape. And in the Task Manager, if you go to the Performance tab, under CPU usage, you will see a bar for each one of your cores. And in fact, there's something called virtual cores. My system only has 4 physical cores, but there's an Intel technology called hyperthreading that treats each core as 2 virtual cores. So the operating system sees 8 cores when in fact there are only 4. So for the purposes of Maya, I might do something like this. Turn off use all available processors and set the number of processors to 6 or 7. Play it on the safe side and put in 6. And on the Mac, it's a similar process, but instead you would use a different program, which is under Applications, Utilities, Activity Monitor. And within the Activity Monitor, you have to go into the Window menu and choose CPU usage. And then once again, you will see a bar for each virtual core. Then you will know how many cores you have and how many is safe to use in the batch render. I would recommend leaving 1 or 2 cores available for other jobs. All right, cool. So this is ready to go. When I click Batch Render and Close, all I see down here is rendering with Maya software. Maya does not display images as it renders. Some programs will actually draw them to the screen. Maya does not. And in fact, there's a separate program running now that is doing the job of rendering. And if I go back to my Task Manager with Control-Shift-Escape, I can go over here to Processes, and somewhere in here will be Maya, and there's also Maya Batch. Maya Batch is actually doing the work of rendering. And Maya is just sitting idle, not doing anything. So in fact, I could shut Maya down, but the rendering would still go on. That's very tricky. Okay, but just be aware, the Maya interface is not actually doing the job of rendering. So behind the scenes, there's another program that's actually doing the job. Okay, we can kind of monitor what's happening by opening up the script editor. And that's this button on the extreme lower right-hand corner of the Maya interface. And the script editor just gives us a little bit more information about what's happening. It's telling us what frame we're on, what percentage is done. So you probably want to leave that open. If you need to kill the process, you can go back up into Render and choose Cancel Batch Render, but I'm not going to do that now. One thing I also like to do is go into the Render Output folder and monitor the images as they're being drawn. So I'll minimize Maya, and in my project, go to Images. And here's Ball 11. That's the subfolder that I created in the Render Settings window. Go in there, and I can make sure that I have icons visible, and I can actually check to see that it's actually rendering. If I want to, I can open these up too and kind of see, check them one at a time. Cool, so we know that our rendering is going. I'll go back into Maya and just patiently wait for the rest of those images to finish drawing. Okay, my batch render has completed, and I can go ahead and exit out of Maya. I've already saved, so I don't need to save again. And we've got a sequence of images here. We've got 30 frames worth. We want to compress this into a movie now. Maya is not capable of taking an image sequence and converting it to a movie. In this case, I'm just going to use Media Encoder in order to convert from an image sequence to a movie. Let's go to the File menu and choose Add Source. And we want to navigate into our Maya project. Here it is, Pipeline Maya Project, Images, and there's the subfolder. Just choose the first frame of the sequence and make sure you enable the option for a file sequence and click Open. Once it's in there, you'll need to tell Media Encoder what the frame rate is. Media Encoder assumes that all incoming image sequences have a frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. Our sequence is at 24. What we'll do is select this item in the queue and right-click to choose Interpret Footage, and then assume the frame rate of 24 frames per second. Click OK. Then we need to choose a format, options for that format, and then a file output. So the format's over here. It's defaulted to H.264, which is an MP4 file. I'm going to actually choose QuickTime and use QuickTime Animation because I can make that a lossless file, and that'll be kind of like a master. And then from that master, I can strike different versions, maybe compress it for YouTube or compress it for a DVD or something like that. But I've got a movie that's an animation compressed or losslessly compressed animation file that then can be my sort of master. All right, let's go into the options, click on that. And we want to turn export audio off because there's no sound. The video codec or compressor, I want to choose animation. Scroll down a little bit, turn the quality up to 100%, and set the width and height to match the original footage. I can just set the width here to 640 and press enter, and the height's automatically calculated to 360. So this is already set up for a 16:9 aspect ratio. Frame rate here is 24 frames per second. Progressive, meaning no fields, no interlacing, and square pixels, just like the source footage. Scroll down a little bit more, and if we want it to be completely lossless, we can set a keyframe on every frame. So keyframe every 1 frames. This means there will only be intra-frame compression, which is compression within each frame, but there will be no inter-frame compression or compression across time. Cool. And then we also just need to set an output name and destination. So click on output name. I just want to make sure that I'm saving into the current project, movies. I don't want to save into the same folder with my images. Go ahead and click save and then OK. And we're ready to go. Just press the play button and the queue will be processed. It only takes just a split second and then we can take a look at it. So here it is in my movies folder. And it's pretty large, as you can see here. It's like 20 megabytes. But again, that's a master file. And if I want to, I can recompress this to make it smaller. So open that up in QuickTime. And let's loop it. We'll go over here to View and choose Loop. Play that back. Fantastic. That is our entire Maya pipeline in one tutorial. And now that you've got the basics under your belt, you're going to want to learn more about Maya. So I recommend that you check out lynda.com and get a subscription, because there's a lot of amazing content on there for learning Maya in 3D, as well as all other computer programs. Thanks a lot for watching.